The broadcast began without warning. Across every human colony, on every military outpost, and even in the floating cities of Neptune's orbit, the signal hijacked every screen. What started as a static hum quickly resolved into an image so chilling that silence gripped entire worlds. General Paul Rutherford was bound in chains, kneeling atop a towering metallic platform, his once pristine uniform tattered and bloodied. His face, weathered by years of war, remained steady, but his eyes burned with quiet defiance. The flames of the execution pyre flickered beneath him, waiting. Behind him stood Emperor Veilcor, draped in the crimson and obsidian regalia of the Galactic Empire. The reptilian warlord, a towering figure with serrated ridges running along his elongated skull, gazed down at the human general as though he were nothing more than an insect awaiting its fate. His voice slithered through the airwaves, rich with sadistic amusement. This, feeble creatures of Earth, is the fate of those who defy the Empire. Your greatest tactician, your so-called Lion of the Void, will scream before you tonight. Know this, your war is over before it has begun. Submit or be extinguished. Rutherford lifted his head, his blue-gray eyes locking onto the nearest broadcast drone. Across the countless screens displaying his torment, he seemed to be looking directly at those who watched, as if etching his final thoughts into their souls. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but unwavering. Humanity doesn't submit. Veilcor's jaw twisted into a mockery of a grin. He gave a casual wave of his clawed hand. The flames roared to life. Rutherford clenched his teeth, his skin instantly blistering as the fire curled around him. The agony was undeniable, but he refused to scream. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the sky, where the cold stars stretched infinitely beyond. He had spent his life ensuring humanity's survival. He would not give their enemies the satisfaction of watching him beg. For a full minute, the only sound was the crackling of the flames. His body, betrayed by pain, convulsed, but no cry escaped his lips. Then, at last, the great general fell. The screen flickered black. The silence that followed was deafening. Across Earth, rage ignited like wildfire. On every outpost, in every fleet, in the war rooms of humanity's most powerful leaders, the final image of Rutherford's burning form seared itself into history. The Empire had done more than execute a general. They had declared war upon a species that had never known how to back down. In the presidential war chamber beneath Geneva, the highest-ranking military officials sat frozen in place, still processing what they had just witnessed. The air smelled of steel and tension. At the head of the table, President Alexander Graves slowly exhaled, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. His graying hair, cropped close in military fashion, did nothing to soften the steel in his eyes. He was not a man prone to outbursts, but the barely contained fury in his expression made the room feel colder. He didn't scream, Graves murmured. The men around him remained silent. He didn't give them the pleasure, he continued. And now we won't give them mercy. Admiral Victor Harlow leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the holographic map of the galaxy. The battle-hardened commander of the United Earth Fleet had seen countless wars, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed an anger he had never before allowed himself to feel. This was a mistake, Harlow said. His voice was gravel, rough and sharp. They think fear will break us. Instead, they've given us the only thing we needed. President Graves turned to him. Witches? Harlow's lips curled into a humorless smile. An excuse? Across the table, Commander Adrian Rutherford sat unervingly still. The son of the fallen general had not spoken since the transmission ended. His chiseled features, so like his father's, remained unreadable, his jaw clenched as if he were holding something back. His knuckles were white against the armrest of his chair. The silence stretched until Captain Damian Wolf, leader of the Ghost Legion, humanity's most feared covert unit, spoke from the corner of the room. His voice was eerily calm, a blade wrapped in velvet. The Empire has declared total war, Wolf said. They've shown us exactly how they intend to fight. They think they've won already. Adrian finally moved. He leaned forward, eyes shadowed but sharp. Then we show them they haven't even begun to lose. Graves studied him carefully. The boy, no. The man had spent his entire life in the shadow of his father. His mind was as sharp as Paul's had ever been. But unlike his father, Adrian held something darker within him. Paul had fought for victory. Adrian would fight for vengeance. If we do this, Graves said slowly, we do it without restraint. No negotiations. No half measures. We do it, Adrian said, his voice eerily quiet like they did to him. The table remained silent. Then one by one they nodded. Harlow turned to the map and gestured. We start with the Empire's shipyards. We cut their supply lines, starve their fleets. We don't give them time to recover. The psychological war starts now, added Commander Richard Hayes, an expert in turning an enemy's fear against them. His gray eyes gleamed coldly. We broadcast their own brutality back to them, show their citizens what their leaders have done. We incite rebellion, force them to fight their own. Wolf's smile was thin. My legion will move ahead of the fleets. We'll bleed them from the inside. And the capital? Graves asked. Adrian's gaze darkened. We take it last, he said, when everything else is ash. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Graves gave a slow, deliberate nod. Make it happen. The war council dispersed like wolves released from a cage. As the door shut behind them, Adrian remained seated, staring at the empty screen where his father had been only minutes ago. He had not wept. He would not. He had never believed in hell, but after tonight, he was prepared to create one. For them. The silence of deep space was broken by a single whispered command. Execute. From the void, a dozen cloaked ships emerged like wraiths, their black hulls swallowing the distant starlight. The Ghost Legion had arrived. Captain Damian Wolf stood motionless on the bridge of the Phantom, his expression unreadable as he watched the silent descent of his operatives toward the surface of Lauder Prime. The Empire had never known fear. Not truly. That was about to change. The infiltration was surgical. Black-armored figures moved through the underbelly of the imperial capital like living shadows, slipping past guards, hacking into security systems, leaving no trace of their passage. The palace, still reeling from its grand spectacle of execution, remained blissfully unaware of the predators now hunting within its walls. Wolf's voice crackled over the private comms. Stick to the plan. Target the War Council. Make it loud. They struck like lightning. The first to die was Lord Commander Relthak, the Empire's chief strategist. He never saw the knife coming. The second was Admiral Vorthis, found hanging from the central palace spire, his throat slit so cleanly that his blood dripped in thin ribbons down the silver walls. The third was Governor Talvek, whose personal quarters erupted into flames moments after his screams echoed through the grand halls. But the real message came when the Empire's planetary news network was hijacked. Across every imperial world, the transmission cut through regular programming, and a single image appeared. The bodies of the Empire's highest-ranking officials, their corpses arranged in silent judgment before the throne. And then a voice, calm and methodical, speaking in flawless high imperial. This is your fate. There will be no negotiations. No surrender. Your war council is gone. Your empire is next. The screen flickered out. Across the Empire, panic spread like wildfire. On the bridge of the Phantom, Wolf watched as the palace descended into chaos. Soldiers running in blind desperation, their discipline shattered. His lips curled slightly. Phase 1 complete. While the Empire reeled from the surgical strike, the United Earth Fleet moved into position. Admiral Victor Harlow stood at the helm of the Valkyrie, his cold gaze fixed on the holomap before him. The time for precision had passed. Now came the fire. The fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, a wall of steel and vengeance stretching across the void. The target was Zyrith Prime, one of the Empire's largest shipyards. For too long, humanity had fought defensively. No longer. All ships, Harlow commanded, opened fire. The void erupted in light. Plasma cannons roared to life, sending beams of white-hot energy lancing through the darkness. Zyrith Prime's orbital defenses activated, but they were too slow, too unprepared for the sheer brutality of humanity's assault. Explosions bloomed across the sky like dying stars as station after station crumbled under the bombardment. Fighters swarmed, engaging enemy squadrons in a chaotic ballet of destruction. The Empire's ships, caught off guard, scrambled to defend, but their formations fractured under the relentless assault. Harlow's voice remained steady. "Do not stop. I want that station gone." Within minutes, the Imperial fleet was in shambles. Fires raged across the shipyard as secondary explosions rippled through its core, consuming entire docking bays in a chain reaction of devastation. Escape pods launched, scattering like insects fleeing a collapsing hive. Harlow did not blink. Leave no survivors. The order was carried out without hesitation. By the time the last Imperial warship was reduced to molten scrap, Zyrith Prime had ceased to exist. From the observation deck, Commander Adrian Rutherford watched the flames dance across the wreckage, his expression unreadable. The battle had been decisive, the victory absolute. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. He turned to Harlow. "Next target." The Admiral glanced at the tactical readouts. "Droska 9. Munitions world. We hit them now, and they'll never be able to replenish their heavy artillery." Rutherford nodded. "Then we hit them now." Even as the words left his lips, a transmission came through. Commander Richard Hayes appeared on the main display, his ever-composed features betraying the faintest hint of satisfaction. "Psychological operations are well underway. The Empire's border worlds are revolting. Civil unrest is spreading faster than they can contain." Harlow let out a quiet grunt of approval. "Fear does half the work for us." "Exactly," Hayes replied. "But I suggest we escalate. We need to show them what real terror looks like." Rutherford met his gaze. "What do you propose?" "A demonstration," Hayes said, voice like ice. "Something they'll never forget." The suggestion hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then Rutherford's voice cut through the silence. "Do it." 2 days later, the Empire's grand capital world, Lalger Prime, received an urgent distress signal from one of its outer colonies, Forlac 4. It was a small world, hardly significant in the grand scheme of the Empire's dominion. Yet the transmission from its planetary governor was frantic. "They came the night," he gasped, his scaled face drenched in sweat. "No alarms, no warnings. Our defenses never fired a shot. They're inside the cities. We can't stop them." The transmission cut to footage grainy, chaotic, but unmistakable. Human soldiers, moving through the streets with terrifying precision. Not slaughtering civilians, no. Instead, they were turning them against their own leaders. An Imperial officer was dragged from his command station, thrown into the streets by his own people. The last image before the transmission cut out was of him being hoisted up onto a burning pyre, his screams eerily familiar to those who had watched General Rutherford's execution. The Empire's fear had turned inward. When the feed cut, the Imperial War Council, what remained of it, sat in stunned silence. "This is impossible," one of the officers hissed. "They don't have the numbers for this. They don't have the strength." "They don't need numbers," another muttered. "They have fear." Emperor Veilcor sat upon his throne, his claws gripping the armrests so tightly that the metal groaned beneath his grip. His golden eyes burned with fury, but beneath it, just for a flicker of a second, was something else. Doubt. He turned to his war ministers. "Mobilize the core fleets. Crush them before they gain more ground." His advisors hesitated. We have already committed most of our remaining forces to defending the inner colonies. If we move them, do it, the Emperor roared, his voice shaking the chamber. As the council scrambled to obey, he turned his gaze to the nearest holoscreen. There, frozen in time, was the image of Forlac IV's burning governor, his own people cheering his destruction. The humans had not just declared war. They were winning it. The Imperial fleet descended upon Vortalis 7 with all the fury of a dying beast, its once proud armadas now driven by desperation rather than dominance. The deep space battlefield, a graveyard of ruined warships and drifting debris, stretched for miles in every direction. It was here, on the remnants of a world that once belonged to them, that the Empire made its last stand. Commander Adrian Rutherford stood on the bridge of the Erebus, his fingers curled behind his back, his expression as unreadable as ever. The battle had raged for hours, each maneuver calculated, each counterattack met with brutal efficiency. Humanity had drawn the Empire into the trap, just as planned. A lieutenant approached, his voice tense. "They are committing everything, sir. Their last reserves, their last carriers, every ship they have left." Rutherford's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "They think we'll break." The lieutenant hesitated. "Should we pull back the outer fleets to reinforce?" "No," Rutherford said, eyes fixed on the burning abyss before him. "We end it here." Admiral Victor Harlow's grizzled face flickered onto the main display. The old warhound looked like he had barely slept, but his sharp gaze was filled with a grim satisfaction. "They're fighting like they have nothing left to lose." "They don't," Rutherford replied. "But neither do we." Harlow nodded. "Then let's break them." Across the void, the Empire's forces surged forward in a final, reckless assault. Their dreadnoughts, once symbols of unmatched power, now burned under relentless human bombardment. Fighters swarmed in a chaotic dance of death, their explosions lighting up the void like dying stars. The once mighty armada of the Galactic Empire was unraveling. On the surface of Vortalis 7, where the battle raged in the ruins of ancient Imperial fortresses, Captain Damian Wolfe led his Ghost Legion through the wreckage. The Empire had deployed their legionnaires, their most elite ground troops, in a desperate attempt to hold the planet. But humanity's soldiers had grown sharper, deadlier. They had learned. Wolfe moved like a shadow through the crumbling corridors, his silenced rifle cutting down enemy soldiers with ruthless efficiency. He barely blinked as an Imperial officer stumbled into view, hands shaking, weapon unsteady. "Please," the officer gasped, his voice raw with fear. Wolfe didn't hesitate. The body crumpled, joining the others. "Clear the compound," he ordered, stepping over the corpse. "Burn their supplies. Leave nothing." His men obeyed without question. There was no room for hesitation anymore. Further ahead, explosions rocked the horizon as the Empire's final planetary defenses collapsed. Commander Richard Hayes, orchestrating the psychological war from orbit, watched as Imperial broadcasts were overtaken by images of their own failing soldiers, of prisoners executed by their own command to prevent capture. "Their morale is broken," Hayes murmured to himself, his fingers tapping absently against the holomap. This is the moment. Across the battlefield, the Empire's once loyal citizens turned on them. Entire regiments mutinied. Some laid down their weapons. Others switched sides entirely, knowing there was no future left under Imperial rule. In the heart of the enemy fleet, chaos reigned. The bridge of the Veilzor, the Emperor's flagship, was in disarray. Emperor Veilcor, once the unshakable ruler of the stars, now stood amid a flurry of panicked officers shouting conflicting reports. "We've lost contact with the outer defenses. Our reinforcements have been ambushed. Their fleet is pushing into the capital." Veilcor's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. "No," he growled, golden eyes flashing. "No, no, no. I am the Empire." An explosion rocked the ship. A nearby officer stumbled. "Emperor, we must retreat." Veilcor's head snapped toward him, his teeth bared in a feral snarl. "Retreat?" he hissed. "You speak of cowardice, when our people demand victory." "The war is lost," the officer blurted, desperation evident. The Emperor moved faster than a man his size should have. In an instant, his claws tore through the officer's throat, sending him collapsing to the floor in a gurgling heap. Silence fell over the bridge. "Anyone else?" Veilcor asked, his voice eerily calm. No one spoke. A new transmission came through, and Veilcor turned toward the flickering screen. Adrian Rutherford stared back at him. The two men, one the ruler of a crumbling empire, the other the architect of its destruction, locked eyes across the void. "You look afraid," Rutherford said, his voice almost conversational. Veilcor bared his teeth. "I should have had you executed with your father." Rutherford's expression didn't change. "You should have." The transmission cut. A moment later, the Erebus's main cannons fired, sending a cascade of plasma into the Veilzor's hull. Explosions tore through the flagship, ripping it apart piece by piece. The bridge alarms wailed in futility as fire consumed the Empire's greatest warship. Veilcor did not flee. He remained on his throne as his empire burned around him. And then, with one final, earth-shaking explosion, the Veilzor was gone. The battle was over. On the ruined surface of Vortalis 7, the last Imperial strongholds fell. The once mighty empire had been reduced to shattered remnants, its leaders dead, its fleets obliterated. All that remained was Laljur Prime, the capital world, the last bastion of Imperial power. As the dust settled, Rutherford stood in the war room of the Erebus, gazing at the final phase of their campaign. "It's over," Harlow said, stepping beside him. Rutherford's lips barely moved. "Not yet." Hayes leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "The Empire's lost. They know it. We could negotiate surrender." "No," Rutherford's voice was cold. "No surrender. No negotiation." Harlow frowned. "We've already won?" Rutherford turned to face them, his gaze hard as steel. "Not until Laljur Prime burns." Silence stretched between them. Harlow exhaled slowly. "Then let's finish it." As the fleet prepared for its final push, Rutherford returned to his quarters. For the first time in weeks, he was alone. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the small, flickering hologram on the table beside him. It was his father. Paul Rutherford stood frozen in time, mid-sentence, captured in an old recording. "Never let them see your weakness," his father's voice echoed through the empty room. Adrian closed his eyes. "I won't," he whispered. Outside, the fleet began its march toward the Empire's last stronghold. The war was almost over, but the final reckoning had yet to come. The fleet arrived above Laljur Prime like an omen of death, a vast wall of human warships blotting out the stars. The planet, once the beating heart of the Galactic Empire, now lay shrouded in uncertainty. Its skies, once filled with Imperial banners and patrol ships, were now empty, silent, a world waiting for its execution. On the bridge of the Erebus, Commander Adrian Rutherford watched the tactical display without blinking. The Imperial capital was before them, its planetary defenses still active, but there was no retreat, no reinforcements coming to save them. The Empire's last surviving forces were gathered here, their remaining fleets forming a fragile shield around their crumbling dominion. He had expected defiance. What he saw instead was hesitation. "Scans confirm full deployment of their orbital defenses," a lieutenant reported. "They're bracing for an invasion." Admiral Victor Harlow stood beside Rutherford, arms folded, his deep-set eyes scanning the readouts. "They know what's coming." Rutherford's expression didn't change. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The order was given. From the darkness of space, a rain of fire descended. Orbital bombardments carved through the Imperial fleet with ruthless efficiency, tearing apart warships that had once ruled the stars. Human dreadnoughts unleashed salvo after salvo, each impact sending debris spiraling through the void. Below, on the surface of Lalger Prime, explosions erupted across the cityscape as human forces began their descent. The Empire's planetary defenses retaliated with all they had. Anti-air turrets spewed fire into the skies, desperate to halt the invasion. Squadrons of Imperial fighters surged upward, colliding with the descending human forces in violent dogfights. The battle was chaos, a maelstrom of destruction that consumed the skies and the land alike. Rutherford stood firm amid the carnage. Deploy ground forces. No mercy. From the dropships, soldiers poured onto the streets of Lalger Prime, their advance relentless. Captain Damian Wolfe led the charge, his Ghost Legion carving through the last remnants of the Empire's elite guard. The city streets became a war zone, filled with fire, smoke, and the cries of the dying. In the heart of the Imperial Palace, Emperor Veilcor paced before his war table, claws flexing, golden eyes burning with rage and something dangerously close to fear. The great throne room, once a place of power and domination, now felt like a cage. His council was gone, his armies shattered, his empire nothing more than a corpse waiting to fall. The doors burst open. Rutherford entered, his long coat flickering with embers, the blood of fallen Imperial soldiers staining his gloves. His soldiers moved in behind him, weapons raised, but he did not speak. He only watched. Veilcor straightened, his breath slow and measured. He did not lower his head. "I should have killed you with your father," the Emperor said, voice a venomous growl. Rutherford took a step forward. "You tried." Veilcor bared his teeth, his towering form shifting slightly, readying for a fight. "You think this victory will last? The Empire is more than me, more than this world." Rutherford's voice was quiet. "No, it isn't." In a flash, Veilcor lunged. The Emperor moved within human speed, his claws striking out in a blur of motion. But Rutherford had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. He sidestepped, the razor edge of Veilcor's strike slicing the air where he had stood just seconds before. His pistol was in his hand before the Emperor could strike again. One shot. The plasma round slammed into Veilcor's chest, burning through his ornate armor, staggering him backward. But the reptilian warlord did not fall. He snarled, blood dripping from the wound, and charged again. Rutherford met him head-on. The two crashed into each other with the force of a storm. Veilcor's strength was monstrous, each strike powerful enough to shatter bone. But Rutherford was faster. He weaved past the Emperor's blows, his own strikes precise, merciless. A knife flashed in Rutherford's hand, burying itself into Veilcor's side. The Emperor roared, swinging wildly. His claws raked across Rutherford's arm, tearing into flesh, but Rutherford did not cry out. Pain was irrelevant. He drove the knife deeper. Veilcor's breath hitched. His movements slowed. His golden eyes locked onto Rutherford's, fury and disbelief warring in their depths. Rutherford twisted the blade. "This is for my father." Veilcor collapsed to his knees. The once mighty ruler of the stars, the warlord who had burned planets and enslaved species, was now nothing more than a broken shadow. His chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven gasps. Rutherford stepped back, blood dripping from his fingers. "Burn it," he ordered. From the fleet above, the final bombardment began. Fire rained down upon Lalger Prime, consuming the Imperial capital in an inferno of vengeance. Towers collapsed, palaces crumbled, the once mighty world reduced to a sea of flames. The people of the Empire screamed, their voices lost in the roar of destruction. Veilcor, kneeling amid the ruins of his throne room, watched his world die. "You are no better than me," he rasped. Rutherford met his gaze. "No," he said. "I'm worse." He pulled the trigger. The Emperor fell. As the fire spread, Rutherford turned away. His soldiers moved around him, clearing the remnants of resistance. But he did not stay to watch. He stepped out onto the palace balcony, looking out over the burning ruins of the city. The Empire was gone. Behind him, Admiral Harlow's voice crackled through the comms. "It's over. The last of their forces are surrendering." Rutherford did not answer. Captain Wolfe's voice followed. "Orders, sir." For a long moment, Rutherford said nothing. He could still hear his father's voice, still see the flames that had consumed him. His hands curled into fists. "Leave no survivors." The order was carried out. By dawn, Lalger Prime was silent. In the days that followed, humanity stood at the pinnacle of victory. The Empire had been annihilated, its territories now under human control. There were no more threats, no more wars to fight. But as Rutherford stood in the war room of the Erebus, staring at the galactic map now marked with humanity's dominion, he felt no triumph. He had won. So why did it feel so hollow? A quiet voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You did it." He turned to see Admiral Harlow watching him, arms crossed, his gaze unreadable. Rutherford exhaled slowly. Was there ever another way? Harlow studied him. "Would you have taken it?" Rutherford didn't answer. The war was over. But what had they become? Outside, among the stars, the embers of the Empire still smoldered. And though Rutherford had burned their enemies to the ground, something darker had taken root in his soul. He had set out to avenge his father. Instead, he had become him. And perhaps something worse.